my father, look, he was an exceptional man. To be quite frank, not everyone is going to be like him. And you can have a boatload of 1,000 immigrants, you won't find another chap like my father. We came here to Ballyhaunis, and even though we started this business empire here, throughout its lifetime, this area remained the central hub of this business empire. So from this, you should take the following lesson, that Ballyhaunis and the west of Ireland in general was not always, and in the future is not doomed to be a regional backwater. So if you take anything from my father's lifetime, take that. We often view ourselves, this area, as the bit left over on the left-hand side of the map, on the edge of Europe. It doesn't have to be that way. It wasn't in the past. And this was through the efforts of both immigrants and locals working together in harmony, which you can imagine cuts right to the chase of what we're all here for. Okay, so that's the past. What about the future? Now, oftentimes when it comes to topics like immigration, integration, whatnot, even without saying it, it can often boil down to different groups fighting over their own slice of the pie. And when looked at it that way, it becomes almost like a zero-sum game. I prefer not to think of it that way. Instead of different interest groups fighting over and protecting their share of the pie, how about take the pie, make it bigger, make it much bigger. A rising tide floats all boats. So with that in mind, how do we float this boat? So I will take a little bit of a dovetail away from Ireland, but I promise I will try to bring it back within the 10-minute time period. So what do we see in the modern world? The 21st century, I believe, will be characterized by the subdivision of this world into cohesive, large trading blocs. And the most important countries going forward will not be the traditional powerhouses, but will be the border areas in these trading blocs through which links are developed from one trading bloc to another. Now, taking a segue away from Europe and away from Ireland, I guess the most prominent example of this would be China's Belt and Road Initiative, what is called the New Silk Road. There, what are they doing? They're targeting the border areas of Southern Europe, especially Greece and Italy, as an endpoint for a large series of infrastructure investments, which are all designed to make it easier for them to bring their goods to market and to have a more fully integrated supply chain every step along the way. Now, how does that help us here in Ireland? Well, you may or may not have heard, even if you have been living under a rock, there's a thing called Brexit. So with Brexit, what do we have? We effectively now, here in the west of Ireland, are probably the most important border area of Europe, because we are the most advantageous stepping point to the heart of the EU. We have a port in Rosslare, for example. Plus, we are also, because of our presence next door to Northern Ireland, we're also a short stone's throw away from the UK, which, let's not forget, is still a G7 economy in its own right. And you can effectively view the UK maybe 5 or 10 years from now as a trading bloc of one. So how many other border areas do you know of in the modern industrialized world which can be effectively a launching pad to target two disparate trading blocs? Well, this is one. So it requires, okay, how do you take advantage of this? Again, take a leaf out of the Chinese book. What have they done? They have, through a series of targeted investments, they have managed to, or are attempting to provide, a cohesive set of infrastructures which will enable business and enterprise to flourish. With every major business importing to a new market, there are hundreds of supplier companies, and that's how you build up local economies. And building up local economies is how you float, raise the tide, and that's how all boats get floated up. And that's how integration catering for immigrant groups, etc., does not become such a bone of contention when everyone is doing well. It does, no matter what, the best will in the world, if the economy here is not prospering, there will be inevitable feelings of resentment towards those who will be unfortunately scapegoated as taking my share of the pie. The only way around this is to grow the pie. So, what do we have here in the west of Ireland? Here's what I see. And please take this as constructive criticism. I see I see that we have some key individual pieces of infrastructure. We have a fantastic international airport just up the road here. We have an hour and a half or 2 hours down the road, Rosslare Seaport, which gives you easy access right to the heart of the European Union. A couple of hours in the other direction, you're right in the UK. We have amazing individual tourist attractions, which kind of make up this quote-unquote wild Atlantic way. But what we don't have is anything major tying everything into one single cohesive whole. And that requires vision, that requires maybe a leap of faith. You know, build it and they will come. Oftentimes I see here, we have great pieces of local infrastructure, but as soon as you leave the environs of the airport or the seaport or whatnot, then you're down to old country roads and whatnot, and that's not a way to build a new trade route. And a trade route is what I'm talking about here. Think of Ireland, and especially central and the west of Ireland, as a new Silk Road. No. The actual Silk Road, which China is building, is really a one-way road from China to Europe, not the other way around. The Silk Road that you can build here would be a two-way road. UK firms from the north of England, Scotland, bypassing the transportation chaos that is bound to happen in the south of England, will look upon with favor a trade route where it might take a day longer, but it's stable because it's not as congested. And what business requires more than anything is not speed, it's predictability. So we have an excellent possible trade route for half of the UK to access its European markets. Plus we also have a trade route for companies who came to Ireland to target the EU to also easily go ahead and export to the UK, who, bear in mind, like I mentioned, they are still a G7 country in their own right. There is money to be made. But all of this requires serious investment in physical infrastructure. But there's more than that. We're not here really to talk about physical infrastructure. We're talking about human infrastructure. This sounds like a somewhat impersonal way of talking about it, but here's what we do have. We have, right here in the west of Ireland, right here in Ballyhaunis, a varied, multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-faith group of communities, all living in more or less harmony. If you want to see what this harmony looks like, go to other parts of Europe. So however we criticize how we handle things over here, look at Germany, look at Hungary, look at Greece. There, but for the grace of God, go us, right? So we're doing a lot better. Let's pat ourselves on the back maybe once in a while. I see here a lot of will to do better, and with will, you can go a long way. Now, this area in particular, we have a 50-year history of successfully hosting immigrant communities from far-flung parts of the world, and getting along with the local community, and not just getting along, but prospering, thriving. That's why I initially mentioned the type of businesses that we were involved in and the reach of those businesses. We weren't just subsisting, we were progressing. I'll tell you a story. My father recently passed away. And going through his office, a few knickknacks and bits and pieces, my sister came across a toy from a German toy company. It was a big shock to me. This toy was an exact replica of one of our old container trucks from the 70s. And it kind of struck me that this is a German toy, made in Germany, which German kids play with, like, you play with toy cars over here. It's got Ballyhaunis plastered in huge print on the side of it. That's global reach. Think about that, okay? That's what we need to aim for here. Now, going back to the multilinguistic aspect of our communities here, English, as an official language of commerce, will gradually reduce in importance in the EU post-Brexit. It's just natural. I mean, I can see a time in the not distant future where kids in Holland, in Germany, they may opt to study Mandarin rather than English 10, 15, 20 years from now. Don't be surprised. So, what do we have here? We have here many people who speak a variety of languages, from Polish to Latvian, Bulgarian, everything in between. Arabic, you have a large Syrian community right here. Native speakers of a language which allows you to target the entire Middle East. Think about that. You have Urdu, which is spoken by a community here who have been settled here they're on a third generation now. With that language, you can directly target 1.2 billion people, right? They don't have this in other parts of Europe. English is hard enough. This is what we have over here. But in order to make this an economic resource as opposed to just purely a human interest story, we need to provide vocational training, because let's ask ourselves a question. Are we actually able right now to set up international call centers, to set up translation services, to set up product localization services for companies who may be producing something here, or maybe supplying something which is plugged into part of a greater whole, but which, for whom literature needs to be developed because it's being exported to all sorts of countries? Are we ready to take advantage of the resources we have here to provide these services? I would say not entirely. What's the missing link here? Investment in human infrastructure. It requires vocational training to allow people who have the ability to speak all these various different languages to provide these skills and services in a business environment. It's not good enough just to say, oh, we have people who can speak language X, Y, and Z. It requires additional training on top of that to be able to make use of these skills in a business environment, provide translation services, for example. Another way in which we can think of maybe improving our human capital here would be the language gap. Ignore it. Sounds funny. Here's what I mean. 10, 15, 20 years from now, there will not be a single profession in existence which will not require computer literacy as a foremost requirement. Even professions that today don't require any form of IT. That's just the way the world is going. And I myself am based in Silicon Valley, and there I've been part of efforts to bring computer literacy to disadvantaged communities. And there we've done things like teach people how to tie in video games with robotics, for example. We give every kid in the class a small credit card sized computer, $35 per unit. That's a single full computer which they can hook in, for example, a light, program a game, hit a button in the game, the light goes on. Wow, the light goes on people's heads as well. Teaching people how to be masters of these new languages, computer languages. Again, it requires investment in human infrastructure, because you can't wait for people to choose computer science as a bachelor degree program. It's too late by then. You need to give them vocational training in these skills when they're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so I think that Ireland and the west of Ireland, we are blessed. We've been cursed by geography for many centuries of our existence. We are blessed by geography today. We are in a key location, like I said, where we can target multiple trading blocks, and we can be a staging post for companies who want to sell in Europe and who also want to sell in the UK. And I would say, let's make our immigrant communities a strength to build upon and not a weakness that we have to cater for. If we grow the pie, then, like Anastasia's talk earlier, where someone mentioned that declining goodwill is a problem, a rising tide, like I said, floats all boats. Let me give you on a bigger scale the kind of economic impact that migrants can have. Like I said, I live right now in Silicon Valley. I've been there for 20 years. Silicon Valley is world renowned as being a center for the startup culture. Do you know that 1/4 of all startups in Silicon Valley are founded by immigrants? I'll just leave you with that thought. Okay, thank you.